gold has this seasonal pattern that is, and it's not perfect, but it's fairly
80%.
reliable. Yeah.
80+%.
And but every year, because I've known about gold seasonality for, let's say, a decade. It's been at least a decade, and every year I look at the where there should be an inflection point, and I think, God, yeah, but there's all these big macro things happening. I think those are more important than gold seasonality.
The Financial Survival Network. Now more than ever.
And welcome. You are listening to Watching the Financial Survival Network. It's time for our bi-weekly meetup with John Rubino. Find him at rubino.substack.com. Make sure you send any comments to me, kl@kerrylutz.com. So, well, I don't know if you caught it, John, but American Airlines, all of the flight attendants, we used to call them stewardesses in a less politically correct era, all of them have voted, 99.4% voted to authorize a strike, and they want a third increase, I think 26% or 30% payroll increase, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And then you've got an article here about the basically what do you call it? The auto workers union there. UAW is authorizing a strike against the big three, and sounds like we might have some inflation coming here, huh?
Yeah, and it's the kind of inflation that the Fed thinks is real inflation, unlike stocks, bonds, and real estate going up. They think wage inflation is a real thing, and that scares them. And basically, unions have gotten their power back, which, in most of our adult lifetimes, unions were meaningless. Private sector unions, anyhow. Public sector unions have gotten more powerful, but private sector unions have been broken by globalization. And now that we're trying to bring everything back home, the unions are figuring out that they can strike for higher wages and get serious settlements, because the pilots have already gotten theirs. United 30%. And American airline pilots, 40% over 4 years, 40-some% over 4 years, plus pension increases and things like that, benefits. I think, was it you and I that were talking about the UPS drivers? How I had to ask you if that was a real number, because UPS drivers, at least some of them now, get $170,000 a year.
Oh no, that's true. They're always high paid. They're getting paid more now than the mail carriers.
Yeah. So these guys who are delivering our packages are now in the top 5% earners in the country. They're making more money than most of the people that they deliver packages to. And now it's working its way down. It was the pilots before, and now it's the flight attendants. And it's going to be basically everybody else who has any kind of union representation at all. They're going to be talking about striking. Well, the UAW, the United Auto Workers, are striking or intending to strike, and it looks kind of inevitable in the next few weeks. And that means they'll end up with what seemed to us to be a very big number increase in pay. So this is a big change. And
who's not going to strike though? Tesla. Because they're not union, they're non-union, because one of the reasons why is that when the unions come in, you can't get stock options if you're a factory worker. Only the big management, non-unionized, they don't want their employees sharing in the ultimate financial success of their host company. And to some extent, unions in this day and age are really parasitic creations.
Is that really why they
won't allow stock options?
Who won't allow stock options?
The UAW. If Tesla's employees were to vote to join the union, they would not be able to get stock options. And many of those people working on the floors of Tesla, the ones that have been there since the beginning, are multi-millionaires as a result of their stock options.
Yeah, well, see, you would think everybody would make that part of their bargaining. You would want stock options in the company that you work for, and everybody wins when that happens, because if the workers have a stake in the success of the company, then they're probably going to moderate some of their demands,
Yeah.
because that's going to hurt earnings, which hurts their options. And that's the union rationale for not wanting options. But God, you should, if you're a big company, you should be handing out stock options like Halloween candy to the people that work there, because that puts them all on the same page with management, in a good way, not in a self-destructive way. So
Yeah.
anyhow,
Yeah,
we're going to learn.
That's why they don't want it. They don't want the workers' loyalties divided. Like, hey, if we go on strike, my stock options will be worth 20% less. They're only going to give me $5,000 a year more, but my stock options might be worth $150,000. So I'll lose $30,000 if we go on strike. Maybe that's not such a good idea. And then the unions lose their power. That's the theory. The reality, I think, would be a bit different. But nonetheless, the policy is no stock options for the factory workers in most of these big auto entities. So,
all right, well, then they'll just demand really big raises then this time around. And so they'll, but anyhow, the point of this is that this is wage inflation, which is looking very real here, and which will spook the Fed into staying tighter for longer, because they're gonna have to try and choke that off. You can't have workers making 15% more every year. That's bad for the country.
Even if it's good for them. Hey,
yeah.
So speaking of interest rates, Bank of Japan, you think they can afford to let their interest rates float?
Well, they just had a Bank of Japan official making kind of hawkish statements just lately here about doing away with the negative interest rate at the short end of the yield curve and letting interest rates generally rise. And today, the 10-year, the yield on a 10-year Japanese government bond went up to 0.7% now, which it used to be negative. And now it's up to 0.7%. That's still incredibly low by our standards. But for a country with the debt that Japan is carrying, it's already starting to become a budget line problem for the government. In other words, their interest costs are starting to rise to the point where it's becoming painful. And if they let rates keep going up, the pain is going to increase. If you have government debt that is 300% of GDP, which Japan is headed that way fast, and the average interest rate goes just to 1%, that's 3% of GDP just going out, in terms of interest. And that's, bordering on unsustainable. That's the kind of thing that will blow up your currency. So Japan is kind of blazing that trail. But most of the rest of the big fiat currency countries are headed that way fast too, because we're, in the U.S., our interest cost exceeds $1 trillion a year now.
And here, $1 trillion there.
Yeah.
Consider that if we have a $24 trillion economy, that's nearly 5% of GDP, 4%, 4.5% of GDP that goes just to interest. Banks like that, right? Banks don't like those higher interest rates, or at least a lot of banks don't, because they have big bond portfolios. And that lowers the price of the bonds on their books, which forces them to report, some kind of a loss, even if it's just a paper loss. And that spooks the depositors and leads to bank runs. So that's the kind of thing that we're looking at now. As interest rates go up in the U.S., these less than well reported losses on bank balance sheets get bigger and bigger. And if a bank has to raise cash to pay off depositor outflows by selling its bonds, then those paper losses become real losses, and they have to report actual negative earnings for a quarter or for a year or whatever, and that accelerates the outflow of deposits and so on until you get a bank run and the bank crashes.
So there are hundreds of, if not thousands of banks in the US that are in that position right now. And that's a very big deal if it gets going. We stopped the bleeding with the Silicon Valley Bank crisis, but there's a lot of other banks in that same position. So yeah, higher interest rates are good for savers and good for retirees and bad for everybody else in the country who depends on cheap debt in order to do what they're doing. And that's the majority now. So higher interest rates are a bad thing. From the standpoint of economic growth and government finances and financial stability, but they're not going away. It looks like because of wage increases and because of energy costs. Oil is way up now too, which is a very inflationary thing. So the Fed
real inflation.
that's inflation that spreads everywhere. Well, so do wages, though. I mean, if
that's core.
Yeah,
but core though, according to the Federal Reserve energy. But right now, as we're talking, and it's 9/11, crude oil is at $87 a barrel, which is at near highs for the year.
See, that's the people need to understand that the inflation numbers are fake because of Fed emphasis. They don't consider stock, bond, and real estate increases inflation at all. And like you said, they don't include energy in the core inflation number that everybody thinks is the real number. So they're leaving out an awful lot of important stuff in a way that makes inflation look less severe than it is. So now, okay, having said all that, it's pretty good chance we're in deflation in another 6 months in any event, because so many indicators are pointing towards a very nasty recession in 2024. That this thing could just flip on its head, where now we're worried about a certain kind of boomy kinds of things, wages going up too fast, inflation accelerating. Pretty soon we'll be worried about the inverse of that, with real deflation pretty soon. And what that'll take is crisis in the real estate market, equities bear market, and a bunch of layoffs in the affected companies. And then maybe plunging commodity prices because of all that. That could be a 2024 story. And it could be, that we will be having completely different conversations in another 6 or 9 months. So this is a crazy world.
Nothing like what's happening in China here. So you've got an issue here. Will gold's seasonality matter this time? What are you thinking here?
Well, so this is an issue for me every year, because gold has this seasonal pattern that is, and it's not perfect, but it's fairly
80%.
Reliable. Yeah,
80+%.
And but every year, because I've known about gold seasonality for, let's say, a decade. It's been at least a decade, and every year I look at the where there should be an inflection point, and I think, God, yeah, but there's all these big macro things happening. I think those are more important than gold seasonality. And most years, gold seasonality turns out to be true, meaning all I had to do was act on that one way or the other, buy or sell, and or buy or go short, and it would have been a really profitable trade. But it's really hard psychologically to look beyond the big macro things and accept that gold seasonality is a real thing. So will it be a real thing again this year? Let's say that it will be. That's completely possible. And it means that right now is a good time to be grabbing some more gold and silver, or the mining stocks or whatever, because normally there's a nice run from September through January and maybe February. That's how the historical seasonality works. So if somebody wants to take a chance on it, they're on the calendar, they're at a pretty good entry point for a long trade in gold and silver. So let's see. We'll revisit this maybe in January and see if it worked out.
Hey, and just as a point of information, in 2022, Q3 gold was up 22% in that quarter alone. So it's about 8 out of 10 times. Problem is, you never know when it's going to be that 2 times out of 10 that it doesn't happen, but it really is an established trend, kind of like what happened, or still happens at times when gold goes down right when non-farm payroll numbers are released. It's just a funny coincidence. It just happens, right?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of things. Lots of things happen in the gold market that are funny coincidences. Like how gold's price will tank at 4 o'clock in the morning, which is the thinnest point in the 24-hour trading day, when the fewest traders are paying attention. Somebody comes in and wants to dump a bunch of futures contracts. Well, selling a bunch of stuff at the thinnest point of the market is the exact wrong way to get a good price for it, right? So that's probably not their objective. They're not trying to get the highest price. They're trying to smack gold down. And nobody goes to jail for this, but it does seem like a form of fraud if there's a government doing it or a big bank doing it or something like that, because basically what they're trying to do is take the sales out of bulls in that market. In other words, people who are just optimistic about the price of gold and want to keep buying and tell everybody else to do it. You smack gold down by $20 or $30 an ounce at 4 o'clock in the morning, and then it opens way down the next day. And that moderates the animal spirits in that market. And I think that's an objective of governments around the world. They don't want gold to be rocking, because that's the exact same thing as saying that their currencies are tanking. Because gold is a competing form of money. So you want gold movements to be smoothed out and biased towards the downside as much as possible. And, a lot of trading activity in gold kind of looks like somebody's trying to make that happen.
Certainly does. I don't know who would do such a thing, but it certainly does. Hey, so we got one here about offshore wind farms are killing whales. I mean, hey, it's like we spent the past 20, 30 years trying to bring these whales back from near extinction, and now they want to kill them off again. What is that about?
See, this falls under the shrinking trust horizon category, where the number of institutions that we think are trustworthy is shrinking so dramatically. And it used to be that the environmentalists they might have been misguided, but they were well-intentioned, right? And that includes the guys building solar farms and wind farms and offshore wind farms and things like that. But apparently, this is from Michael Shellenberger, who has a Substack called Public News. Apparently, we're building lots of wind farms off the east coast of the U.S. And part of the reason for that is that, it's windy out there, so it's free energy. Part of it is that nobody wants wind farms on their farms or in their neighborhoods or anywhere that they can see them, because it's noisy, it's disturbing to look at. Yeah. So we put them offshore and think that's a good solution because it doesn't take up any geographic footprint. It's not taking up anybody's land. Not
in anybody's backyard. The ocean.
Yeah, that is nobody's backyard. But it turns out you make so much noise when you're putting in wind turbines. You've got to drill down into the floor of the ocean to make
you got to anchor
strong
them
enough. Yeah, and that is causing a huge uptick in the number of dead whales they're finding on the East Coast beaches, and it's threatening to cause push the right whale species to extinction. And the government is lying about the amount of noise, for instance, that they're making with all the shipping and all the pile drivers and stuff like that. And there's a documentary that just came out where they actually went into the water with sensitive acoustic gear, and the noise that they pick up is just astounding. No whale that's trying to echolocate will be able to echolocate in that. And the government has been lying about it. So,
who would think such a thing?
Well, I would have thought that the environmental guys were at least honest people, even if they didn't always get the science right. And now here we go. It's just the mainstream media
They're lying too.
parrots the government line. They say, "Oh no, government scientists have investigated this, and there's no noise. There's nothing to see or hear here." And they were lying too. So we're talking the New York Times and the Guardian and that level of mainstream media
God,
lying
can't trust
at the
anyone.
behest. Yeah, you just about can't. And
I got the solution. Get them earplugs and GPS, and they'll find their way, right?
Yeah, whales are smart. They should be able to figure out GPS. But,
right.
But the important point in all this, well, there's a political point and a financial point, is that the fewer people we trust out there, the more we tend to bring our trust horizon back home to people we can see, farmers whose food we can actually buy directly, and politicians who we can shake hands with and who we've known for years, and people like that. And we don't trust anybody else anywhere beyond that. And of course, since money is managed very distantly by big institutions, when we stop trusting all the other institutions, we of course stop trusting the guys who run our money. And that brings us one step closer to that gigantic financial crisis / currency reset that we keep thinking is imminent and hasn't been so far, but may be pretty soon. Because if you just don't trust anybody, then whatever the government tells you about your money is going to be seen as a lie, right? And you're going to act accordingly. So we're headed for that day as we tick more and more institutions off the list of the people we can trust. And the FBI is long gone. The CIA was never really on the list, except unless you're Rachel Maddow or somebody like that.
Or what's his name, Anderson Cooper, who just happened to work as an analyst for the CIA, right?
Yeah, so he knows they're honest because he used to work there. But the mainstream corporate media is still captured by these big institutions, but more and more people are starting to figure out that the big media conglomerates are actually just other institutions that should never be trusted. And that's why for instance, the cable news networks are losing viewers at such a dramatic rate. They're shrinking relative to Joe Rogan, and to Russell Brand, and the other big podcasters out there like you. The people are shifting their and to Substack. People are canceling their New York Times subscription and then subscribing to 10 Substack writers or whatever on the assumption that they'll get a lot more.
Hopefully Rubino.substack.com is one of them that they're canceling in favor of. But
I would love to show up on that list of people that New York Times is losing out to.
Let's not forget that one of the main reasons for building those wind farms offshore, besides all the avoiding the NIMBY people, is tax credits. So basically the government is paying to kill whales, right?
That is basically the follow the money solution to all this is, because that's where the money comes from the government. That, by the way, is being paid off via campaign contributions by the wind industry. So it's a circular flow of money. The wind industry buys a bunch of politicians who allocate a bunch of taxpayer money to the wind industry.
Yeah.
And since, the wind industry might pay a few $1 million to buy politicians, but they get back billions of dollars. So it's a really good investment.
Great ROI.
Yeah, great ROI. And it comes at our expense, basically, or it comes at the expense of people who trust the Fed to maintain the value of the dollar. Because basically that money comes from inflation. It's just printed out of thin air, makes the money less valuable. And it hurts the people who have big dollar bank accounts and money under the mattress and things like that, and own government bond funds. So basically the government is taking from them, giving to the wind industry and to many, many other industries, the defense contractors, the big banks, et cetera, who turn around and finance the politicians' campaigns. So in effect, it's basically regular people financing the political campaigns of people who are impoverishing them. It's a system that historians, once they untangle it all, are not going to be kind to later on. But right now, it's working beautifully for the guys who are profiting from it.
All right. So we didn't have this on the list, but I got to bring it up because I know you saw it and it's good for a couple of laughs. But when you think about it more, it's not. Finally, the obesity epidemic is paying huge dividends to big pharma because they're coming up with cures for what government policies like the food pyramid caused in the first place by taking fat out of food and encouraging you to consume refined carbohydrates and processed foods, which is directly attributable to the obesity epidemic. Now, companies like Eli Lilly up 600% since 2020 on the strength of their drug Wegovy, and Novartis, which has a market cap over $400 billion thanks to Ozempic. And then the theme song on the ads for Ozempic is going back to, I think it was Orleans, and their hit song from the 80s or 90s, it's magic. And they're just creating money out of thin air. It's magical what's happening here, John. And all the other pharmacy companies are rushing to get in on this obesity gold rush.
Well, it is magic for those guys in the sense that a perpetual motion machine is magic. You create a lot of lifestyle diseases, which are basically chronic diseases that never go away. Then instead of insisting that people adopt better lifestyles, you hand them pills or injections that manage the symptoms of the lifestyle diseases that you caused if you're big pharma or big food. And it goes on forever. I mean, obesity, you get a 12-year-old to make a 12-year-old obese. They will be obese for a lifetime because they're too fat to exercise. And their minds don't work well enough for them to actually understand nutrition. So you got them for a lifetime. It's the same formula that was used with smoking, where you get a 19-year-old hooked on cigarettes and they never get off. And they smoke and smoke and smoke until they get lung cancer. And then a different part of big pharma makes money treating the lung cancer until the guy dies. It just goes on and on. So it's a gold mine for everybody concerned except regular people. Yet
quite
another
a business model.
Yeah,
That's quite a business model. And
it's a great business model. Right?
You know the most profitable department of every hospital out there, John? Do you know the most profitable service?
Let me guess. I would say the cancer, right?
Chemotherapy.
Chemotherapy, yeah.
Because not much labor involved, high margin item, and
it doesn't work, so they have to keep coming back.
Yeah, well, we know it doesn't work. It might work initially. Some people are cured or effectively treated by chemotherapy, but invariably in a large number of cases, and I don't know because each cancer is different, like leukemia, they cure it, or non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, they cure it and it's basically forever. But in many other types, they cure it for a few years and then it comes back. And imagine if the chemotherapy got reimbursed on the success of the outcome. Imagine if colleges got money from the government based on the success of their alumni, right? We would have a lot less problems if you got paid for results rather than for efforts.
Yeah. Well, you're right that chemotherapy cures some versions of cancer, but it has no effect or negative effects on a lot of other kinds of cancer, but they use it for everything because they get paid for everything. So there's no correlation between the efficacy and usage for something like chemo. And and once again, follow the money. Who profits from this? And there's another aspect to this too, because there's another player in this game which is the government, which has to pay out a lot if people live a long time. So the government actually benefits from pharmaceuticals that kill people before they stick around and collect 30 years of Social Security or something like that. So a lot of the drugs, it could well be the part of the chemo story is that it's designed to kill off a lot of cancer sufferers before they've taken thousands and thousands of dollars out of Medicare.
I would prefer to think that they got to do something to help these people, and they don't know what else to do. And holistic stuff is very questionable. It might work, it might not work, but and again, a lot of these are lifestyle diseases brought on by a lifetime of consuming impure foods, processed foods, and not consuming whole foods. But I just thought that was interesting. And along those lines, so what's the deal here with Bill Gates funding the cutting down and burying of trees to sequester carbon? I mean, I thought trees and plants took CO2 out of the air. They breathed it in at night as we breathed it out during the day.
Well, I think the stated rationale might be that old trees stop taking carbon out of the air. So you cut them down, you bury them, and then you plant new trees on the graveyard of the old forest. Well, okay, but that's not the real reason. There's another deeper purpose to what he's doing. Just like with buying all that farmland, he's buying a ton of farmland and a lot of timberland, or I guess not timber. If it was timberland, they would they would cut down the forest and then use it for lumber.
Yeah, right.
But this isn't the case. They're just going to bury the trees. So something else is going on here. We have to figure out what it is. And it's going to be incredibly sinister and disturbing when we figure out what the real reason is, something occurred to me lately, though, that a lot of the guys who scare us the most, like George Soros and Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates, they're really old. So they're going to be dying off here pretty soon, unless...
Along with the trees they're killing.
We'll just bury Bill Gates with his trees. But there's going to be a whole new generation of people for us to worry about here pretty soon. So we'll see if the new guys are as sinister and as scary as the old guys. But because George Soros' son sounds like he's taken over for George Soros, he sounds pretty scary.
I think he's an underachiever, though. Most scions of wealthy capitalists are basically slackers and underachievers. He might buy into the whole thing, but I guarantee you he won't work 24/7 like his dad, trying to make his nightmarish dystopian future a reality. So we can only hope. So what about AI? It's the AI.com 3.0. I mean, this is amazing.
Well, remember back in the 1990s that companies completely unrelated to the internet would just slap .com onto their names and their stock price would quadruple. Well, it's starting to seem like that now because every big tech company is announcing, oh yeah, we've got our AI project. And today there's two of them in the news, Tesla and Meta.
Tesla's been in the news.
Yeah, but today their stock price went way up. Somebody upgraded them because of
Dojo,
their AI program. Yeah. And see that it's like with the .coms. You can't all be a superstar internet company. All the grocery stores can't be, successful .coms. And so it's probable that you can't have 50 different awesome AI companies out there, right? You can have some big chip makers and you can have some companies that use the AIs, but they all can't be the Amazon of AI. So we're going to have a bloodbath at some point when there's this shakeout and a handful of AI companies end up winning. So this is a dangerous investment time for AI because you can't know ahead of time who's, look at computers back in the day. There were a lot of big name computer companies that are gone now, but people didn't know at the time that they were going to disappear because somebody else was going to come along. I think that's the same thing with AI. But AIs themselves obviously are going to have an impact. Once the robo-dog with a 50 caliber rifle on its back becomes sentient, see, that'll be a big deal, and it's not clear whose AI is going to be the one that awakens in time to set loose the robo-dogs, but we'll see about that. But
I
it's just
thought he was in
interesting.
the Ukraine already, shooting up Russians, right? He also flies around, dropping grenades on them too, right?
Well, you know that the U.S. wishes it was just 10 years further along with droids, because then they would be unleashing them in Ukraine. But we've got a lot of drone related things that we can do, but it doesn't look like we've got enough to be decisive in a big war just yet. But that day is coming. Did you see the story about Ukraine had its drone submarine fleet all ready to go and try and
Musk.
yeah. Well, he just refused to turn on Starlink to let them navigate. It wasn't that he turned it off or anything. It just hadn't gone live yet, and he didn't accelerate the process of it going live to let that happen. But yes, there was going to be an attack by a fleet of drone submarines on a navy. That was almost going to happen.
Who wants to get involved? Can you blame him for doing that? Really? Can you blame him, even though they're making him out to be unpatriotic and everything else? But it's enough that he already gave the Ukrainians access to Starlink. All right.
Well,
because the Russians had cut their communications lines. Now he's supposed to facilitate active attacks. And don't get me wrong. I mean, I don't particularly like the Russians either, but I kind of see Musk's point, don't you?
Oh God, yeah. You don't want to be involved in the middle of something like that. Because I mean, they could,
right?
But for Musk to go and then piss off the KGB, whatever their initials are now, it's FRC or something like that, the successor to the KGB. If you've got the CIA and the KGB after you, and you're required to travel the world for your business, how long is it going to be before? So he's got to be worried about that. You really don't want to be in the middle of things like that if you can help it.
I would think. I mean, it's just such a mess. And hey, what are we supposed to do? All right. Well, one more major story. The Fifth Circuit partially affirmed Judge Doughty's July 4th ruling against government sponsorship of government censoring big tech. And basically, they cut back some of his ruling. It was a preliminary injunction, but they out and out ruled that U.S. government is violating the First Amendment, censoring, engaging in censorship of big tech.
Yeah, they scaled back the original ruling, but they kept the concept, which means, actually, Matt Taibbi had an article on this where he analyzed what got scaled back and what got kept. And he said it's possible that the federal government will settle for this and not take it to the Supreme Court because they might be able to get around the current scope of that ruling. But if they take it to the Supreme Court, that would be hilarious, because you've got to think that this Supreme Court is going to rule against or in favor of the First Amendment and against government agencies being able to circumvent the First Amendment by threatening big tech companies to censor, and that would be fun to watch. And I really hope that it does go to the Supreme Court, just because that would be definitive. I would think that they would want to make it ironclad, and they would just shut that whole process down of governments working with private sector companies to censor other private sector actors. So we'll see. The process is still ongoing, but so far so good for the First Amendment.
Okay. So what about the other side, the plaintiffs appealing the Fifth Circuit ruling? They can appeal it too, because they got they're infringed effectively. I don't want to say infringed, but part of their victory in the lower court was kind of rolled back. So it makes sense for them to appeal it as well. And it seems like it's just the kind of case the Supreme Court would take, one of first impression, and puts them finally where they can end big tech censorship if they so desire. Even what it hasn't been brought up in this case, which is the platform's seemingly desire to censor speech, particularly on the right, when it offends them. And maybe, I was thinking, now that they've found that that big tech, that the government is effectively using big tech to censor, that we're all infringed. I got a cause of action, and they can't even fight it because a court has held that the government is censoring big tech. Therefore, that big tech is working hand in hand with the U.S. government. I don't need to prove that anymore. I just got to prove that they were doing it to me, right?
Can you sue the government for money in a situation like that? Because a lot of people lost a lot of money by being censored. A lot of people lost their jobs. Yeah.
Damages are in order for that. Yeah.
So there could be a class action lawsuit
sure.
of the 1 million most heavily censored people in the country against the U.S. government. That would be that would be a great lawsuit. God, can you imagine the
sure.
lawyers lining up to try that case? Yeah.
I think they could easily do it. It opens up a whole can of worms. What about when a certain company that follows the alphabet, what about when they just take somebody off, they deplatform them, and the government didn't ask for it? Well, you got to wonder, all this deplatforming that took place, was it at the behest of the government? Because we didn't get they did discovery, but they didn't do full discovery of every single person who got deplatformed. And was it at the behest of the government? I mean, we don't know that. I personally thought they're just a bunch of lefties and they're censoring righties, but maybe there's more to it than we even thought, that it was at the behest of the government that all of this censorship started in the first place, in which case they're effectively carrying out the government's will by doing it. So they're agents of the government. So the government really is infringing on your First Amendment rights, which the court has said they are.
Well, you would think, too, that right now liberals are appalled by this process, right? Because they're in their current incarnation, the Democrats are pro-censorship. So they're not happy about this.
Pro-censorship.
Yeah, but you would think that the left in general, because they're the ones who get censored most often, at least historically. So you would think that they would be kind of relieved by this, because sooner or later, the American Communist Party and all the socialist offshoots and pretty much everybody on the left are going to be censored again. They're going to be picked on by a conservative government at some point in the future and deplatformed and imprisoned and whatever. It's the usual thing that has happened to the left over the years, because they're usually the ones opposing wars. So you would think that they would have a good feeling about where this is going, and they would want it to get to the Supreme Court, and they would want the Supreme Court to rule that censorship by the government is unconstitutional, full stop, end of story. But so far, that's not the case. Yeah.
You would think, but, they were the ones that were behind it. Hey, you would think they were anti-war. If I seem to remember Vietnam and Iraq, not so much Afghanistan, they were always against it. And now in Ukraine, everything is good, right?
Yeah, it's been quite a transition. I mean, there's even, you know who Marianne Williamson is?
Oh, yeah, sure.
She's a new age left wing. Yeah, well, she's a presidential candidate now.
I know. I subscribe to her email list because I like to get a good laugh every morning at her.
But, even she is in favor of the Ukraine war.
Really? She is?
See, she and Bernie Sanders are in favor of the Ukraine war, in favor of us supporting Ukraine.
Really?
Check it out. Yeah, it's astounding.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
What's the world coming to?
It's Well, Donald Trump broke the left. That's all. That's the sentence that explains it all. He terrified an awful lot of people on the other end of the political spectrum to the point where the ends justify the means. You can do anything as long as it's in the service of putting Donald Trump in prison, and
due process be damned, huh?
Well, and Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are so closely intertwined in the minds of people on the left now that you can also do anything to get rid of Putin, including right up to and including starting a nuclear war. So a big part of the country has gone absolutely crazy, and Trump did that.
It's all Trump's fault. Well, we are getting a warning of a child kidnapping in Palm Beach County. I think that's our cue to let it go, John. Make sure you go over to John's site, rubino.substack.com. Subscribe to his material. A lot of interesting things about portfolio performance I've witnessed lately. Hey, check out our site, financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Make sure you sign up for your free newsletter. John, we will catch up with you in a couple weeks.
Okay.